Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, September the 7th, 2023. Today I want to return to a royal theme. I read this article in Fox News on their website, which talked about Charles's reaction to the birth of Prince Harry. And if this story is true, it's not only surprising, but it puts Charles in a pretty bad light. So let me show you the story. So it's titled Princess Diana Tapes a Haunting Reminder King Charles's Remarks about Prince Harry left her shaken. So, how did Charles react to Harry's birth? So let's see what this says. So the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana was said to be at its best when she was expecting Prince Harry. As seen here in 1984, Prince Harry was born that year. The reason for Charles's new attitude was simple. He wanted a girl to round out the family, Anderson shared. He was so convinced Diana was pregnant with a girl that he refused to look at any sonograms. Diana did look, however. I knew it was a boy, she later said, and I didn't tell him. Diana would recall that time in their marriage. We were very, very close to each other the 6 weeks before Harry was born, the closest we've ever been and ever will be. According to Anderson, the would-be king's reaction to Harry's birth was devastating for Diana. "Oh God," Charles blurted out disdainfully, much to the astonishment of doctors and nurses in the room, said Anderson. "It's a boy. And he even has red hair." At that moment, said Diana, it just went bang. Our marriage. The whole thing went down the drain. Something inside me closed off. So that's the moment. And in this video, I've talked a lot about Harry as a person, but in previous videos, but now I want to talk about Harry as a time, just as September the 15th, 1984, 4:20 p.m. in London. Not worry about him as an individual. So that's what I'm going to do after I've looked at today's astrology. I'll be looking at how Charles might have reacted to this birth astrologically, what was going on in Diana's chart, and I'll also be looking at the composite chart, the chart where you can put the two people, Charles and Diana, where you can create midpoints of their respective planets and create a chart for them, and see how that composite chart was impacted by Harry's birth, and whether we can really see what Diana was talking about, that something in her just closed off. Can we see that? I don't know. So before I do that, I'm going to look at the astrology for today, which is Thursday, September the 7th, 2023. So here goes. Here's the chart for today. We can see that the moon is still in Gemini, but it's now late Gemini. Indeed, the moon has now made its last aspect to a traditional planet, and it's now just moving to a square of Neptune. So when I say last aspect, when it's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet. So it's therefore void of course. It's not moving to anything. So probably for most of us today, it's really going to be difficult to apply ourselves to anything definite, and we can't expect to get results for our efforts right away. We may have to wait until tomorrow or the day after before anything starts to connect. And with the moon making a square aspect to Neptune, it's kind of dominated my reading. It dominates what I say in my forecasts for the 12 signs. It is confusing. Gemini is about the mind. It's about how we communicate. And it's in an air sign. Yeah, Gemini is an air sign. And so when the moon makes a square to Neptune, there's a sense of confusion. We think we know it, but we don't know it. So bear that in mind. You mustn't make assumptions at all. Consider the possibility that you're being deceived. Consider the possibility when you're told something that it's simply not true. And consider the possibility that your own emotions are letting you down. So that, I think, is the main aspect for today. We can also see that Venus and Mercury are semi-sextile. You can see that Venus and Mercury are exactly one sign apart, 30 degrees apart. And as I've said before, the semi-sextile is not a particularly fortunate aspect because, Leo and Virgo, they relate to the world in two completely different ways. So there's Venus in Leo, proud Leo. Venus wants attention, and wants praise in many cases. It enjoys being flattered. But then there's Mercury. Mercury is analytical. Mercury likes to stick to the facts. Mercury likes to focus on the surface details, at least when it is in Virgo. Mercury in Virgo is not going to be too bothered about Venus wanting praise and flattery and so forth. So there's a mismatch between these two planets. Some of us might feel that we're being treated in a really disdainful way. We want attention and someone else is just ignoring us or focusing on stuff that we're not interested in. Or, we might think everything's fine and then someone might make, a negative comment about what we look like or might make some nitpicking criticism. So be aware of that. On the other hand, look at it from Mercury's point of view, Mercury in Virgo. Mercury in Virgo wants to focus on the details, wants to get things done. And here you've got some prima donna, Venus in Leo, making a scene. And, that's not what we need. So these two planets, Mercury and Venus, Mercury in Virgo, Venus in Leo, are operating in different ways. And there could be something of a clash. And so what we have to do is kind of bring them together. If we're the one who's being critical, we need to make some effort to understand the other person's point of view. A little bit of flattery won't go amiss. On the other hand, if we are super egotistical and we're screaming our praises from the rooftops, we perhaps need to, relax a bit and perhaps listen to what other people are saying. Maybe they're saying something useful, and we need to accept that. And while this is going on, the Sun is aspecting the Saturn, Neptune, and Mars, Uranus midpoints. That's kind of not great. There is a bit of fear there. We might have, a great desire to get things done, but, with Sun on the Saturn, Neptune midpoint, there are all sorts of obstacles, weird obstacles, our own fears, other people's fears. We might try to break through this, and then we have Sun on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, which is about violent action, going over the top to achieve something, and maybe in the process causing a lot of trouble and causing a lot of damage. So we do have to be a little bit more relaxed. We probably have to accept that today not a great deal is going to happen. It's not a day for achievements, massive achievements. It's not a day where many of us are going to sort of look back on it and say, yeah, that was great, we accomplished so much. And it's not really that kind of day. So if we're aware that it's not that kind of day, then we don't have to make a scene. It's just not necessary to make a scene because there's no point. So if we do that, it should be an okay day, nothing spectacular, certainly nothing to write home about. Now, as far as my forecasts for the 12 signs are concerned, I've done them. Tried to be positive, but bear in mind when you listen to these forecasts that square between the Moon and Neptune, Moon in Gemini, Neptune in Pisces, does to an extent dominate what I say. Okay, here we go. Here are my forecasts for Thursday, September the 7th, 2023. Aries, you've seen it all before, and you know how people are going to behave. This means that you can show wisdom and experience, as well as sheer insight. But you need to deliver the message in the right way, bearing in mind that some people don't like to be wrong. Perhaps you can use your magic powers to help them make the right decision. Taurus, not everyone understands the financial dimension, and they may feel that financial restraints can be ignored. But being a sensible Taurian, you know this isn't true, and somehow you have to educate the people around you. But at some point, you might be tempted to make an elementary mistake that could prove very costly. Gemini, the moon continues moving through your star sign, so overall you're going to feel confident, and also you'll be able to deal with many of the challenges that come your way. However, the moon is making a hard aspect to Neptune, so at the last moment you could be dazzled and confused, and as a result move in a direction you weren't planning on going in. Cancer, don't get involved if you don't have to. The things going on around you are unlikely to be going anywhere, so you don't want to waste your time. Also, the moon, your ruler, is moving towards a 90-degree aspect with Neptune. It might represent a psychic or spiritual insight. It might also represent delusion and chaos. Leo, you hear what people say, and straight away you have a reply. But be careful about being too hasty. It's so easy to jump to conclusions, but there's a good chance that you've got it all wrong. Be particularly careful in social situations. Friends and colleagues might seem entertaining, but they could so easily lead you astray. Virgo, you want to be successful, and if you're working, you can project exactly the right image. But it's important that you think for yourself, because if you involve other people in your decision-making, your effectiveness could be worn down very quickly. And in a similar vein, it seems that in relationships, there's a touch of fantasy. Libra, it's easy to skim the surface, particularly if you're a Libra, not getting your feet wet, never knowing what opportunities and horrors are lurking below. But there comes a point when you have to stand for something, and that requires some immersion. So at what point are you going to stop skimming and take the plunge? Scorpio, there's no need to be overly self-conscious. People aren't as observant as you think they are, and they won't necessarily notice your errors and omissions. But that doesn't mean that you have to be careless. Just do your best. At the same time, you must make sure that the next thing on the agenda, not necessarily what's happening today, but maybe tomorrow or the day after, is properly prepared for. Sagittarius, relationships are difficult to avoid, but you have to ask yourself whether they're any good for you, at least in terms of today. They could require a lot of energy, and they could distract you from important tasks. In matters relating to property, real estate, and fixed assets, the first piece of advice people give you needs to be questioned. Capricorn. What people ask for is not necessarily what they want. They almost think that you can read their minds to understand their real desires. But that's not realistic, is it? Though you do have to sort of work around the problem. So if you get a request, make sure you get it in writing and make sure that the details are clearly laid out. On a different note, your lungs could be more sensitive than usual, and the air you breathe needs to be clean and smoke-free. Aquarius, there are things you want to do, but you're not sure about the consequences. You therefore need to think things through with a particular emphasis on money. You'll then be in a better position to take the right course of action. In general, the impulse to be creative needs to be grounded in reality. Pisces, you're capable of making clear waters muddy and muddy waters impassable. And today, you're not an easy person to have around. Nonetheless, the questions you ask are useful, and your refusal to fit in with other people's plans is a sign that you haven't lost touch with your core individuality. So what I'm going to do now, as usual, is I'm going to look at the I Ching, and I threw 3 coins in the air, and I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 37, the family. It's not a particularly exciting hexagram, but it's solid. It's about your family. It's about the clan. It's about, the people you normally hang out with. And this is where your attention should be. You're not out in the world, making things happen, because as I said when I looked at the astrology, I think it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to really make things happen. And so it's probably going to be better to just sort of mellow out in a secure environment, and that's your family. And you can do things to make your family environment more secure, more comfortable, more harmonious. And I think that you will benefit from one particular person who sort of comes onto the scene and sort of helps stabilize things. Whoever's the leader in your family. I mean, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, but whoever that leader is, I don't know, am I wrong? I think families often have a leader, someone who makes the decisions. Whoever that person is, that sort of, I don't know, maybe they're a sort of benign dictator. Depends on your family, doesn't it? But that person, that person means well. They can be trusted. If you give them support, then things should be fine. And just remember that the I Ching does take a kind of a Confucian view of the world. It takes a hierarchical view of the world. The family is the basic hierarchical structure on which society is built. And so what we have to do is support that structure and support whoever it is in the family is the one who makes the decisions, because I think their decisions in most cases will come from a good place and will be the correct decisions. And sorry to sound so traditional, but that's the way the I Ching is. Maybe the I Ching's right. And this hexagram, the family, it does move. This 5th line moves, and it moves to hexagram 22, which is grace. Grace is, in a way, is quite a boring hexagram, but as you can tell by what it's called, it's not a bad hexagram. It's just about, it's about form. It's just making sure everything is fine, everything is harmonious, and that's what can happen. You put in the work, and in the family, you do what's expected of you, and everything flows smoothly. But, it's the family, it's the foundations of everything. You're not looking for excitement, you're not looking for drama, you're not looking for instability or revolution. You just want everything to be fine, graceful, harmonious. And, that's how the day can end, provided you do what's expected of you. Now, what I want to do is look at the chart, or the charts, of Charles and Diana, and consider how they responded to the birth of Harry. Is it true that Charles was just in a state of absolute, I don't know about fury, but just was so unhappy about Harry that this time was a complete, was the effective end of their marriage? Can we actually see this in the chart? Of course, I do apologize if you're bored of Diana. I just talked about her. I'm sorry about this, but I just saw this article, and it seemed an interesting idea. So just a reminder, that is Harry's chart, but this time we're not looking at Harry as an individual. We don't care about his personality here. We're just saying this is a time of birth, and we want to know how two people, his parents, responded to this event. Was Charles as completely mortified as that article suggests? I mean, not mortified, but I don't know. That's the wrong word. I mean, was he so badly behaved as I don't know? It just seems an extraordinary thing to say. Why did he want to go? Why was he so obsessed with having a girl? And I think the article mentions. I'm not sure. I think it might have been Diana's mother or someone sort of dressed Charles down, according to the story, saying you should be happy you've had a child who's normal, nothing's wrong with the child, you should be happy, and there you are complaining that it's not a girl. So let's set up so we'll put Charles in the middle, we'll put Harry on the outside. Now, normally when we look at a chart like this, father on the inside, son on the outside, we're looking at how father and son get on. But that's not what I'm looking at. I'm just looking at, just a reminder, I'm looking at what was going on for Charles when this happened. So Charles, as you can see, Charles had Sun in Scorpio in the second house. So Sun in Scorpio in the fifth house. So you could say that Sun in the fifth, that's his fifth house, rules children. Sun in the fifth, maybe Sun in the fifth is one of his sons. Maybe because he's got Sun in Scorpio in the fifth house, he's got Mars in Sagittarius in the fifth house. So you could say you've got two male planets in the fifth house. I'm using Placidus, not whole signs here. If you've got two male planets in the fifth house, I would suggest two boys. I mean, that sounds a bit too literal, a bit too easy. I'm sure it doesn't work out like that statistically. So at that moment, when he saw his son for the first time, Mercury was exactly on his Saturn. So this is a short-lived aspect. Charles, Saturn in Virgo, and then Mercury comes along and just hits it. I don't know, that Saturn in Virgo, it's a bit harsh, Saturn in Virgo. I mean, obviously a lot of people born in the late 40s would have had Saturn in Virgo. It's not personal. Maybe if you're if you're a prince or a king, you can make it personal. It's easier to make it personal. Just focusing, the details and concerned about some aspect of the details, getting too over the top on certain aspects of the details. But Mercury hitting his Saturn might have been a little bit of a shock. It certainly would make him quite harsh. That's not a very emotional aspect, having Mercury conjunct your Saturn. It should be a bit more controlled, but in his case, according to if this article is right, there isn't much control. I think his expectations that it might be a girl also are very much shown in this chart, because Harry, when Harry was born, Venus was at 1742 Libra, and Charles's Venus is at 1623 Libra. So he had just had her Venus return. Venus, remember, is the universal planet of women, of girls, young women, and so forth. And so you can perhaps understand that during his Venus return, when Venus was returning to the place it was when he was born, when Harry was born, he might have had the expectation this is going to be a girl. So Venus had given him this expectation. He went into the hospital thinking it was going to be a girl, yet it wasn't. It was a boy. And so you could imagine perhaps that Venus aspect was totally overthrown, and so that might suggest why he responded so badly. But it doesn't change the fact that he might not like the fact. It might not. It doesn't change the fact that he is now a father. He was now a father for the second time. That's good. It's got to be good. He's had a healthy son. What's he got to complain about? So that is kind of reflected in the chart as well, because the sun was at 22 degrees 57 Virgo, and his sun was at 22.25 Scorpio. And this sun is on his fifth house. That sun is really about children, specifically because it's a sun about a male child, and the transiting sun was exactly sextile his own sun. So that makes sense. It's a nice aspect. That's him becoming a father. That's good. He might not like the fact that it's a boy rather than a girl, but nonetheless, objectively, it's good. Another aspect to consider is that is the moon. Now, the lunar aspects are really quick. The moon moves about a degree every 2 hours. So, they're only around for this aspect. Is only in force for a few hours. Doesn't even last a whole day. So the transiting moon was at 2120 Taurus, and Charles's sun was at 2225 Scorpio. Now that sun is very connected with children, and so the moon makes a hard aspect to his sun, and so that perhaps indicated why he wasn't feeling great about the situation. Transiting moon opposition the sun. Now we all have transiting moon opposition our sun every month, so it really is not a big deal. But I suppose when that transiting moon happens at a time that we've just become a parent, maybe it's just more of an important event. So we now move on to Diana. So you can imagine, I suppose, that Diana would Diana would have been, I don't know. I have no idea what state she'd just given birth. So what was happening when just after she gave birth? So this is here's Diana's chart in the middle, and there's Harry's chart on the outside. Remember, we're not talking about the relationship between mother and son. We're considering what was happening to Diana the moment she gave birth. What sort of things were going on. Now, as we know, she had the moon coming up to a conjunction with her Venus. Now, Diana has Venus in Taurus in the fifth house. I think that if an astrologer had looked at Diana's chart, before she had children and she asked about children, what would an astrologer say? What would I say if someone who who hadn't yet had children was expecting to have children, and I looked at this chart and I saw Venus in Taurus in the fifth house? What would I say? What would any astrologer say? We would say you're going to have a girl. It would indicate a girl, doesn't it? Okay, it might be one girl, but Venus in Taurus in the fifth house, it's easy astrology, suggests someone who is going to have it suggests a daughter. So it's kind of surprising. So if Charles had been into astrology and had been looking at Diana's chart, he would have had every right to have an expectation that it was going to be a girl. He would have probably expected William to be a girl as well. But no. The moon was the transiting moon at 21 Taurus was approaching her Venus. So the moon was in the fifth house, so she had transiting moon in her fifth house. Great, that perfect symbolism for giving birth. I mean, that's easy astrology. So what else was going on? Mars was on her ascendant. So Mars at 16 Sagittarius was on her ascendant at 18 Sagittarius. Okay, it's not exactly there. It's 1.5 degrees. But Mars is a planet of which is quite sort of angry, and so you can see that she might have been been quick to get annoyed. But also Mars is about surgery. It can be about birth. I mean, birth in a way is quite it's quite a violent event. And so Mars on the ascendant is it's not surprising someone might give birth with Mars on the ascendant. But the two main aspects, as far as I can see, Jupiter at the time of birth was, where's Jupiter gone? I've lost Jupiter. Jupiter was at 3 Capricorn, and Diana's Mercury was at 3 Cancer. So Jupiter opposition Mercury. How would we see that? Now, if you just say, well, Jupiter is a fortunate planet, that's great, she's going to be happy. That's one way of looking at it. But it is an opposition. Jupiter's in Capricorn as well. Jupiter is fallen in Capricorn. That's not great. I think that Jupiter opposition Mercury may have done something to her mind. I don't mean that in terms of making her crazy. I mean in the sense of bringing something up, bringing something into her awareness. And maybe Jupiter opposition Mercury, Jupiter makes bigger everything it touches. You can see that Jupiter opposition Mercury fits with a realization that something has changed. Diana has Mercury in the 7th house. That's to do with relationships. Then Jupiter makes an opposition to Mercury, and so that's a realization that something is wrong. And that Jupiter also was making a trine to her Mars. So, in her natal chart, Diana has Mercury Mars sextile. That indicates that I don't know, when she was pushed, she could be quite sharp with words. In quite a clever kind of way, Mars sextile Mercury, and so maybe Jupiter was sort of triggering that, and it made sense to her, and Charles's reaction to her likewise made sense. So those are the two charts. In terms of looking at what was happening by transit to the two charts. Okay, after the event, 2020 hindsight, all that, we can see that there was stuff going on. I would not have said it was necessarily dramatic. So I want to look at a third chart. I want to look at the composite chart. So the composite chart, there's several composite charts. There are different ways of creating a composite chart. And I'm not finding the right one. So let's start again. So the composite chart. So there's Princess Diana's chart. So what one is doing is one is taking the midpoint of each of the planets. So you're taking Diana's sun, and you're taking Charles's sun, and you're finding the midpoint of the two suns, and you're creating, and that is the position of the sun in terms of the composite. Likewise, you do it with all the planets. With the ascendant midheaven, then you take the midpoint of the two midheavens to give you a composite midheaven, and then you use something called a table of houses. See, this book, the computer does it for you, but in the old days you'd use a table of houses to read off the ascendant. So let's do the composite between the two, and we'll set this for Westminster. Yeah, you do have to, with the composite chart, when you read off an ascendant from tables of houses, you have to consider where they are or where they meet. So that is a further complication. So I'm taking London as the place to set it to set the chart. I mean, Diana was born in Sandringham, so it's not going to make a big difference. Sandringham is in, where is it? East Anglia. It's north east of London. So this is a composite chart. The chart of Charles, Diana put together into a single chart. So this is the marriage. So Diana was saying, this is a point where supposedly the marriage died when Harry was born. So the question is, how does Harry relate to the marriage? And I think, but in terms of this article, suggesting that this Harry's birth was a time when it died. This might be something that really we need to look at. So I'm going to set up as usual. I'm going to put bi-wheel. I'm going to put this composite in the middle, and I'm going to put Harry on the outside. Okay, so there is a composite chart in the middle. And there is Harry's planets on the outside. And you will see in this composite chart, there is an immediate problem with this composite chart. But in this composite chart, the ascendant is 12 Taurus, and Saturn is at 16 Scorpio. In other words, Saturn is exactly well, not exactly, it's 4 degrees from the descendant. So having Saturn in the 7th house, close to the descendant in a composite chart, suggests that the marriage is, at the very least, is heavy. It's restrictive. And I think that this may indicate the age difference. I know you can get huge age differences in marriage, and it's not a sort of an unprecedented age difference. But Charles was born in 1948, Diana was born in 1961, so 12, 13, I think 13-year age difference. That's quite a large age difference. And I think maybe the Saturn in the 7th does hint at that. I mean, people are going to have age differences of 12, 13 years, and it's going to be fine. But in this case, it matters because we see that Saturn is on the 7th house cusp. So in terms of that Saturn, it's not a great composite. Okay, there are other things which are nice about the composite. It's got Jupiter is exactly on the midheaven, but Jupiter's in Capricorn on the midheaven. I'm not quite sure if you read signs in composites, because it's a bit kind of contrived, making midpoints, having midpoints, and then saying you can say that because two planets are on the midpoint and the midpoint has Jupiter in Capricorn. It seems a bit contrived, but Jupiter on the midheaven should be quite good, and I suppose that represents a relationship that's very public, with a lot of which started off with a lot of optimism with the royal wedding in 1981. But yeah, but Jupiter on the midheaven, it's not really as relevant as having Saturn on a descendant, and I think that puts a big question, would have put a big question mark on the relationship. So when Harry was born, Saturn was at 1251 Scorpio, and you can see that Saturn was pretty much exactly on the composite descendant when Harry was born. Exactly. I mean, we've got pretty good accurate times of birth for both Harry and for all of them, Diana, Harry, and Charles, and yeah, Saturn was exactly on a descendant, and that vindicates the technique, because this use of creating composite charts using tables of houses to work out where the ascendant is, it sort of vindicates using composite charts, using this particular variety of composite charts. So Saturn, yeah, I mean, I can see that was the moment, perhaps, when the marriage died. I think that's certainly perhaps shown in the composite. Also, look at Mercury. In the composite chart, Mercury was at 5 degrees 5 Virgo, and Mercury was at 5 degrees 12 Virgo. So Mercury is about, in this case, it's about a realization, a knowledge. It wasn't just an unconscious knowledge, just an awareness that, something in the background, that something may be wrong. Mercury is actually, it's just thinking about it. I think with his article in Fox, in this Fox article talking about this moment as being important, I think that Mercury conjunct Mercury says, yes, this was a moment that it really connected. And finally, in the composite, Mars, Harry's Mars, the Mars was square the Sun. The Sun in the composite is very important. That's Sun in Virgo, and Mars was square it. So I think overall, I think it does make sense that Harry's birth killed the marriage. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I hadn't really known about that before. Of course, it puts more pressure on Harry. I mean, now Harry Harry now has the feeling that he was a disappointment to his father because he was the wrong gender, and that his birth was the moment where the marriage died. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.